So, what better way to start the Brave Wisdom podcast than for an interview? And our first interview is going to be none other than myself, but I'm going to be interviewed by someone who knows me best, someone I've been married to for 17 years, and she's known me since my senior year of high school. Please welcome to the Brave Wisdom podcast, Leslee Owen.
Hello, everyone. It is such an honor to be here to help draw out the most authentic version of Brett. At least that's my hope. I I was thinking about this opportunity, and I thought, this isn't really about us being real and raw. Like, I don't think this is about you being real and raw as much as it is about you being real and resolved. Because it's not like we're trying to put all of this unhealed stuff out. Um, I think this is an opportunity for you to put forth, yes, these are things that were very painful for you and for us, but they've been healed and they're resolved, and I have witnessed this healing in your own life. But I thought before we jump in, how did we even get to this point? Brett was editing some reels in preparation for the podcast, and I'm going to say your comfort zone are posting things that are probably a little bit more polished. The really great points of your sermon, the scripture, and he showed me some of those, and I was like, everybody else is posting those things. Like, why would anybody want to listen to that? And I made him scrub through his sermon to the personal parts, the parts that I don't know why he wasn't posting it. And so we kind of got a clip. But what was the clip about? So I want you to say, like, what was that clip about?
That particular clip, probably my journey the last 4 years, my burnout from full-time ministry, and kind of where I knew it was, I think I used the word crushing my soul that moment. Yeah, pretty deep stuff.
Yeah, you said you were addicted to speed.
Oh yeah, that's that. Everyone who knows me or been around me, I don't lack energy. And so, yeah, I think, but it wasn't just speed, it was driven achievement. I was addicted to achievement, recognition, to performance, all those things that come with a ministry type of role. I remember one time when COVID hit, I stopped teaching, right? And it was like I had withdrawals from not being on a stage. It was really hard for many of us that probably are teachers or are always on. It was different. I had to be different. I had to be a different type of person than someone that's always performing and speaking.
Yeah, and so I told you that stuff right there is what helps humanize you and helps people see that you don't always have it all together. And this isn't a podcast about showcasing all of the fancy scriptures and, the great preaching lines. You and I have certainly been under enough of those. This is about drawing the curtain and allowing people to see what the last 5 years has been like for you. And so this is what I would love for this episode to be about is I got a front row seat to all of that. And, I know it's not easy for you to talk through some of those things, but I think you are very willing to go there in this podcast.
Yes, but I'm also the editor, so anything I don't feel like sharing, I'll just cut out.
Very true. I can't tell you how to edit this thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Brave Wisdom was something that was birthed out of kind of this force for change. And when would you say that you felt like this moment, looking back in these 5 years, but is there a standout moment for you where the way you were approaching life, the way that you're approaching your faith, the way that you were approaching your relationships just wasn't working anymore, and it kind of forced you to re-look at what wisdom and courage actually meant?
Yeah, I think so. I recall a season in my life when I was journaling, and I share this often in messages too, because it was a time when the journaling allowed me to slow down, and I hadn't really slowed down. And I even shared a message prior to that season about getting off the treadmill. And I really think that was a message, yes, I shared, to the masses, but I really think it was a word that God was depositing in me, that I was on a treadmill, and you know what it's like. It's the routine. It's like you run and you're not really going anywhere, and it's not fun. I wasn't enjoying it. So that theme of running has always been something the last, 5, 6 years. But when I started journaling and when I really entered a season of discernment, I journaled every day for an hour every morning. And I mean, it was a non-negotiable. It was intense. And I remember those words being written, and it was just this I almost felt God was saying the things you're gonna need in the next season to come. I was even kind of in a season where I was getting to my 40s. I'm 41 now. And, every time you get to a new decade, you start examining everything. And I was doing that as well. But those three words that were deposited deep into my soul were wisdom, courage, and strength. And from those have been the themes of my life and this journey the last 4 years. The strength that you need to maintain your strength. I work out now. My health. I think that's a lot to do with the health and wellness. But then ultimately, just to share where this is all fast forwarding, every year I pick a word. And so 2 years ago, it was find your voice, find my voice. It was crazy, some of the things that happened that year. 2023, in fact, I started the year and I said, I'm going to find my voice. I took the art of teaching course. By that fall, I went to the conference. And also by the fall of 2023, I kid you not, I joined what's called the Arena, which is a learning community with Erwin McManus. And I come off this summer, I'm like, I'm going to find my voice. And then literally, they advertise the Arena as a community to join. And it says on the website, find your voice, master your message. Obviously, Erwin's a communication expert, and someone I've always been admiring his work, his books. They've been transformational in my life. So I turned to Leslie, I turned to you, and I said, can I join? You said, go for it. The best investment you can ever make is yourself. So I joined the Arena in 2023. And that fall, I went to the conference for the first time. I went to the Art of Teaching conference, which propelled some other work and us connecting to a life coach out in California who's done some pretty miraculous work through, us going to a retreat, and God's just met us there, and he hosted that. So Find Your Voice was part of that journey. And I think, this podcast is now an opportunity for me to use my voice. But, 2024, I came into that year after all of this soul searching, a lot of coaching, a lot of things that we went through. And the word that I received that year, the beginning of this year, this past year, was courage. And then it's just crazy some of the things that I think that align. Um, I became a Braves fan. I've always loved the Braves since I was a kid. And there's another story to that. I ended up getting a Braves hat coming back from a conference because it was about this uh, man, who was it? But one of the guys was talking about artifacts and how you can put on a different hat and be a different person. When he's on a sales call, he puts on glasses because then he's more smart, intelligent. But the point was, is I got these Braves hats. I started wearing the Braves hats, started getting into the Braves, and that word stuck with me too, which is a coincidence, but also not a coincidence. I mean, my word's courage, and I'm drawn to the Braves. So fast forward again, this year's been incredible. And I think it's been incredible because we've had the courage both in our personal lives, you and I, in our business. I'm not a big risk taker. I like things to be organized, but we've taken some risk. We've combined our businesses into one. We've worked together, which is not easy. That took courage. A lot of the things that we've processed in our own counseling and coaching, that's taken a lot of courage. And I think I just come to this realization that it's wisdom and courage that has got me this far. And it's wisdom and courage that'll take me the rest of the way. And then I look around the world and I remember seeing this quote that wisdom with that wisdom without courage is basically fruitless. It doesn't produce anything. You can have all the wisdom in the world, but not the courage to do something, and it'll just be sitting there. And so that's not the way I want to live. I'm active. I am high energy. I am prolific is a new word that I'm actually adopting. And I like to create things. And so um, that's where brave wisdom comes from.
Well, let's go back. I mean, because that's very much where we are today and where we're headed. but that is not where you started. And so I think it's important to give people, a picture of what you were like 5 years ago, what your life was like 5 years ago, and I mean, because I think anyone on the outside looking in would probably look at you and say, "But you've always been brave. You've always been wise. You're a pastor. You were a pastor, you know, for 18 years. So, you know, how why all of a sudden brave wisdom?" So I think this is the part where being really courageous and pulling the curtain back and actually, you know, I just saw a post from one of a close friend of ours who literally said that being a pastor, he felt like he could never share what was actually going on in his life for the fear of gossip, of what people would think of him, and it kept him imprisoned, in some of the darkest places of his life. So 5 years ago, you and I, were still in full-time ministry. I was on my way out, you were still there. Uh, talk to us about what that life was like.
Again, one of the things I wrote in my journal around that season was, I seek not to be known, but to be someone worth knowing. I think in the pursuit of being known, no one really knows you. I think in the pursuit of being recognized and being in front of people, someone that they can follow, you're afraid that if you show your authentic self, they won't follow you anymore. Um, I was thrusted into leadership at like 24 years old. I mean, I was straight out of college, going into seminary, and you getting married. Maybe before that, I've just been thrusted into a lot of leadership fast, and I had to learn and to grow. And I think one of the things that I had to struggle with is I couldn't allow myself to fail. I'm a straight A student. Even when I would calculate what grade I would need to get to pass the CAT class, I'd still go for the A just because I couldn't deny that achievement. So that was a big part of being in ministry too. And like I said earlier, it's this you talked about speed and this driven by achievement, that cycle, you leave people behind. And then I think the way I'm wired, I think one of the things I remember just being, I'm lonely. I think I had you, and I think recognizing for how much I worked and how much ministry demanded, I was often lonely and I didn't have outlets of rest. That was a huge part of it. I think many people in full time ministry have no outlets of rest. They teach the Sabbath and then they don't obey it ever. It's like the one commandment they think they don't need to follow because they're in ministry or something, when in fact, it's probably the most essential commandment to follow in order to minister. Because out of that rest comes such greater, peace, anointing, and speaking, and just an energy and a life that's behind you that people will respond to and God will work through. But when we're running around and always in this dysfunction, that was another word that I would say. And, it's so easy to blame the organization. And there were issues around every organization has issues. It's so easy to blame other people. But I have a tendency too in myself to blame myself all the time. So it was always my fault. It was my fault. It was my fault. That's even to this day, I struggle with that. And so I took a lot of personal responsibility for things that I had no responsibility for. We were talking in the car the other day about people who I guess I have a inner local control like this. It's locus of control, that whole thing. I take things personally responsible. I say sorry for everything. So with all that said, what was it like? My One of the ways I describe it is slowly your soul is being crushed. And there was one scary moment towards the end of me and my discernment, and it kind of led me further to say, Lord, this is time that I step out. Is I remember having a big event on a Sunday night. And of course, it was one that had to be put together fast. There was some things that were brought into it. But I did it and it was great. The team did great. But I was the first time in my ministry career in 18 years that I got off the stage and I didn't want to do it anymore. And I didn't want to do it. Actually, I didn't even want to do that service. And it was scared me. It scared me a lot. Like it was one of those things was like, what is this? I had never felt this before. And so that was part of it. And I think if someone is hearing me and can be in a situation, I know this was the wisdom I received. I started to follow a book called Sacred Pace. And that book gave you a process to discern. And that process began with getting with Jesus, prayer. That was my journaling. Then it continues to take to step two, which is gather the facts. For the first time in 18 years, I knew what it meant to stay. I started to take a little peek at what the facts and what the reality of leaving would look like. And in gathering those facts, started to realize, wait a second, maybe there is life outside of what I thought was going to be the rest of my career. Maybe there are experiences like you had, Leslie, like at another organization where they they propelled you and they led you in a certain way of growth and leadership and just like clarity. Maybe that was what it was. You had great clarity. It wasn't a perfect role. No job is perfect, but at least you had clarity. Had leaders that were investing in you. um, so we gathered facts, and that was a big part of it. Then I looked for divine circumstances, and I tell you, there were so many, including COVID. Like, remember I told you about get off the treadmill? Well, that was a message that I had months and months before. And it was like COVID hit, and then everybody's off the treadmill. There was nothing to run on anymore. The whole world's shut down. And so, doing that, looking for divine circumstances like that, and now having to really deal with your stuff because you had nothing else to do. I think COVID, as hard as it was, as 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 really as tragic as it was for so many people. I mean, I lost loved ones too, and friends and coworkers even at the time. And um, it for many people, and for me, it was a time for me to actually deal with stuff I hadn't dealt with in years, stuff you and I needed to deal with. So COVID, by the grace of God, was a season of reevaluating. And I think we've read a lot of books, and I've studied this too. That I think God took me off a course. Like, there was one course, and I think COVID allowed me to make a decision, and I got on a new course. And for a while there, we felt like nomads. But I think I'm not alone. I think there are many people around that season of 2020 whose lives got disrupted, and now they process something. And we're entering 2025, and I think the people like myself are finally finding their voice, having courage to do things that they knew they should have done all along. It's just taken this process to get you there.
I remember I think I remember that evening when it was a Sunday night, and I felt like the children's ministry team they were actually putting on the event, and, for whatever reason, you were sitting with me, which, FYI, Brett never we never attended church as a family together in that traditional sense because Brett was always, preaching. So to have Brett sitting down with us and the kids was a very, very rare thing. And I remember we went home, told the team, "Great job," and you went straight to bed, and you were in your bed, and I could just tell. And I remember going up to you, and I remember telling you, "This is not it. It is not over." But there was definitely something in you that I could tell was broken, and from your part of the story, which was you didn't wanna do it anymore. That's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to see as a spouse and as your wife, to see this person that to the public is constantly on and happy and always has a scripture and is encouraging, but at home is exhausted and drained. You would come off of some of your biggest events, VBS, and you would be in bed for days. It was just these highs and these lows and these highs and these lows. Um, People don't see that part, right? People don't know that, and you're not alone in this. A lot of people in ministry have this very what do you talk about it a lot because you read a book. It's like this disordered private world.
Yeah. It was by Gordon MacDonald, Ordering Your Private World. He talks about that, especially in ministry. And you see this all over the news. And they have one life, and then sooner or later it gets revealed that they have another one behind the curtain. And that's and I think though I can say I made a conscious decision even early on that I wasn't going to let ministry um take away my family. I
Well,
wasn't going to
let's
let
talk about that.
ministry, even, affect our covenant of marriage. I think that my values have always been pretty well defined, even though I may not have known them all the time. I see them demonstrated by my parents, my grandmother, who was a great influence, but my parents have been married for 50 years. I see that marriage is something to be so valued and cherished. And so, yeah, you're putting your finger up because you want to talk, but I just will say that too is like, yeah, you, y- I would quit ministry all over again if it ever meant me losing you.
But there was certainly a time where I did not believe that. I didn't believe that. And I think it's one thing to say that you have values. This is what it's called. It's called cognitive dissonance. It's when inside you say that you believe a certain set of values, but your actions are completely different. And so I'm not even saying this just about Brett, because I will raise my hand and say that during that season, I also lived a life of cognitive dissonance. I wanted certain things, and yet I lived out other realities. And so that led us to a counselor's office, and that was a pivotal conversation between you and I, because even though you 100% knew that you would never allow ministry to get in our way and in the way of our family, it was very unspoken, and I didn't believe it because your actions of always choosing the church, of always choosing the event, of always choosing the volunteers or the kids that needed you more than my kid or our kids. So our counselor had you say it out loud to me that day, and it was the first time that I had actually ever heard it because I didn't believe it.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, there's a lot to that, of course. And the truth is though, and I can say it in the most clear way, I chose Leslie, and I would choose her 100 times over, because one thing that I think I believed was like, oh, I'm so important. No one can replace me. Well, that's not true. And you're not that important in terms of it is and really, if it really boils down to it, God cares more about who you are becoming than what you are doing. And I think my human doingness of Brett was fine. I could do Brett. And I remember this was a big revelation, is like, but could I be Brett? So even within the marriage, I think that's the beautiful thing about being married. And if you're not married, I encourage you, because it's something worth pursuing. It's You really don't know who you are until you have this mirror called the wife, who reflects things and shares things and sees things and knows things. And you can't hide from her either. I mean, we're coming home from a wedding the other day, and we're like, and Leslie's like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, we had all the kids in the car for 6 hours, and I just said, "I want to be alone." And she just laughed. And it's true. Sometimes you want to be alone, and you're not alone because you're married. But the truth is, um, I think that's really one of the anchoring things of Brave Wisdom too, of where I want to come is I want to be a person. Like I said in that quote, I want to be someone worth knowing, not be someone known who's by what they're doing, but to be someone of 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 deeper work. And I think that boils down to it. Hey, our marriage, I have confidence, would have survived even if I stayed in ministry. Somehow we would have worked it out and we would have found a way. But I think me leaving full-time ministry allowed for a deeper work to happen in a way that it must happen for both of us. Because part of the story, and we're not going to go into this because you're interviewing me, but you were also hurt and kind of had to heal and had to go through a lot. And I remember too, it's like one of the realities of our coaching and that counselor that we sat on the couch, his name's Dave Galbraith, and he is Breakthrough Moments. I'm on the board of his ministry now. Incredible. If you need breakthrough in your life, he's the man to talk to. So we're sitting on his couch. But one of the things that went on is we went through some of that. I realized that for our entire marriage, I kind of brought you along, and you had pursuits and things that you sacrificed in order to allow me to do the things that I knew I felt and I needed to do. But there was a revelation too that if I as a husband is to love my wife as Christ loves the church, then I think that requires sacrificial love. And so there was a moment in some of this where I thought to myself, wait, it's Leslie's turn, you know? And that's a huge thing too. So we may not have time to go and unpack that all the way. That may be another interview. But I had no problem at one point in this discernment. This was even after I left, to yield to some of my ambition to allow you to find yours and fulfill yours, because I saw you do that over and over and over again for me. It was your turn, Les.
Yeah, we could do a whole marriage podcast about all that stuff.
That one gets emotional.
That one does. That one does, and for any, I do think, because I will obviously be sharing your podcast when it comes out, and I have a lot of women, um, that I get to speak into their lives, and so many of them, would love to be able to have a marriage that feels more like a partnership than, do whatever he says to do, be whatever he says that you need to be. Um, and yeah, that took a lot of courage for you to yield and to step back and to say, "Hey, what do you want?" But it also took a lot of courage for me to even feel like I had permission to voice that, because I was raised to just treat my husband like the king of the house and make sure everybody's happy and be a martyr. So I really didn't even know. I mean, that whole year of, like, finding your voice, like, honestly, I kind of feel like not only were you finding your voice, but I was also finding mine. And we had a very pivotal coach, Tim Holmes, during that time, who helped amplify, like, he literally took this very timid little girl that very much is similar to you, and isn't it funny that we attract these life partners that have similar brokenness, but, a very timid girl that was seeking and driven by achievement and needed validation, external validation, and Tim really helped me see, and understand my own voice and the power in my voice, and allowed me to turn that up. And Brett, gave me the space to do it. And it wasn't believe me, there were plenty of times where I revved that voice up and hurt him, because it was like years of pent up, not saying anything, and then all of a sudden poor him all at once. Um, but we gave each other the space to find those voices, because we were kind of just in denial of, like, I don't know, it's almost like we felt like we couldn't say what we wanted, or it was wrong to want the things that we wanted, but eventually we did find, uh, each other and the authentic versions of each other. But where I wanna go with this and ask you this question, because it's one thing for you to have left and to have left 18 years of ministry, it right? And it's a whole other thing, to find yourself out of the one thing that gave you an identity. And so you and I had multiple conversations, very hard, um, I mean, you were very broken of, like, "What do I do with this pastor title that I no longer carry," right? In that formal ministry sense. So can you walk us through, you left, and now you're dealing with, "Who am I?" Like, what was that like for you in those years?
Wow. Well, that's not done overnight. And remember, I left in 2020. So the first 2 years, I do think that was some of the untangling of my identity. I landed at an incredible place. I landed at Epic. entertainment and epic ministries. And I had a friend and a boss who just was that. I mean, it was like I got to work with one of my best friends. His name's Taylor Griswold. And if you know Taylor and you're around him, he's just someone that is real and encouraging and just uplifting and thankful. And his gratitude expressed towards me and my work was so different. And it wasn't that I wasn't thanked for my job and stuff in the past. I mean, of course, even your paycheck is a thank you when you think about it. So I know I was, you know, I know the organization I worked for and the church I worked for was very thankful for me, but Taylor expressed gratitude in such a way that I was like, man, this is annoying. But that gratitude, that love, even, and that friendship, and that grace that he carried, I think was a healing place. So it was like I didn't have to abruptly leave ministry because I was still in it with a traveling evangelistic group. But I think there was a growth season there where I started to understand some of the things about myself that I did best. I think that was it. Another thing about the identity is like I was known at the church as the kids pastor who could do all these things and lead all these things and do the school and the TV. And so coming out of that, you kind of start realizing, well, wait, what am I really, really good at? And I've been searching that a lot of coaching, a lot of performance coaching, a lot of like personality stuff. And man, I've discovered so much more about myself. So many tools from the five voices. I did that with a group of pastors and we had a community around that, to all these different assessments, the working genius model. I now know about myself that I operate in these working genius areas of wonder and galvanizing. And you can see that throughout my career. I could invent and have great, big, grandiose, visionary ideas, but then I had the ability to galvanize a team, bring around hundreds of volunteers. But even beyond that, it applies other areas. So I think shedding the identity of pastor was, by the grace of God, something that kind of did the last 2 years. Now I would also reflect on that title pastor in a different way now, because pastor is more of a service than a title. A pastor is someone that's like a shepherd who serves people, and we've taken it in the church model and made it a CEO, and that's not what pastors are. Pastors should smell like the sheep, not be sitting on a pedestal. So I would say I'm still a pastor. I may not formally be in a functional role or title delegated role, but I pastor. And I'll tell you this, anytime, and I've made this a value of mine. So if you're listening to this and you need something, you know that I will respond, because anytime a youth or a child from my past that I've served and ministered to comes to me, what do I do? As I will stop what I'm doing and I will take their call. I'll meet them for coffee. I'll reach out to them. I'll do whatever I can to pastor them. And we've seen the fruits of that. I just officiated a wedding. So I still get to officiate weddings. I'm fully ordained. And so I'm still a pastor. Um, but I officiated a wedding of a young girl that was on yours and I's creative team all through middle school. And I've known her since elementary. She came to our life group, met this boy, and they got engaged. And we just did their wedding a few weeks ago. Congratulations, Sydney and Austin. And I've known Sydney since she was a child. So to answer this clearly, I shed more the functional role of being a full-time pastor, but I think that will always be part of who I am. And I think as I reframe what God has done in my life, I think it brings me to this stage where I want to be not only someone that shepherds and helps people. I think what I really reflected on more, even on the past, was I'm a teacher. I love to teach. And I'm also, in one of the assessments, I'm a professor. That's my frequency, 7 frequencies by Erwin McManus. I have the professor frequency. And if you know me, you probably see that. You can ask whatever book I'm reading. And that's why Brave Wisdom is going to be a great outlet. As a professor frequency, I think now I'm comfortable in that skin. I have more to learn and I want to learn, but I learn fast. And I learn fast, and I want to be able to learn fast and help others learn and not get stuck. So that's where this podcast comes in. And so this podcast, as I'll share, is as much for those listening as really it is for me. You heard some of my sequential journey of find your voice, have courage. Well, I didn't even want to do this podcast for the longest time. Leslie is right. Right, Les? How long have you been telling me to do this?
Well, I think the biggest thing he said to me one day, I think it was on our way to church. He was like, "I just don't think I can speak in long form." Like, because when I was bringing up the podcast, he was like, "I just don't think I could speak. What would I talk about for that long?" And I just looked at him because he talked all about how he's this professor, and so lately, I would say the last year, Brett has just been a sponge, like, just so much information, and his main outlet is me, and so he'll whether I he's now asked, "Do I have would you like to hear more?" So he now asks if I wanna hear more, and sometimes I will tell him, "No, I would not like to hear more." And so it just boggled my mind that he was here telling me the reason that he didn't think he could do a podcast is because he didn't think he could speak for that long. And I was like, I'm calling that out. That is not true. If there is anyone that could speak for a long time about anything, it's you, and you just need to get over this fear of whatever it is and just do it. And so, I'm thrilled that you had the bravery to do it. You certainly have the wisdom, and I wanna end with this question. Um, if you could go back and tell yourself 5 years ago, like, in the thick of ministry, asking those big questions, there has to be more than this, but probably feeling like leaping into an entire you have an entirely different life, Brett. Like, you and I have an entirely different life. If Brett and Leslie could look at what we're doing now, I think they would be in shock and probably be on the ground. Like, this was not what we thought or where we thought we would be. And so if you could go back and tell Brett in that season something that he could hold on to that would infuse him with brave wisdom, what would it be?
You know, it's funny as I sit here, it's like, what would I say? But then I hear voices. I had the most incredible voice in my life, my grandmother. That voice was an anchor. There are people and voices that continue to push you forward. And hers has been that since I was a child. So that idea of not only finding your voice, I think I would tell myself to listen to the voices that are like the ones that got you there. And it's funny, my grandmother had a uniqueness about her. And as I look at the people in my life the last 5 years, the Daves and the Tims, even Erwin McManus, I get to have a one-on-one, or not one-on-one, but a Zoom call with him and Aaron every week. And Erwin McManus has so much similarities to my grandmother in the way she loved people that it's been healing. So I think the answer to the question is when you make a change, and I think this is an analogy too, when you jump, like I jumped from a career, when you're in a season of transition, or when you're in a hard season, I know because I've experienced that God will send people who will catch you. And if you're listening today and you're one of those people, you know who you are. And I want to thank you because countless people have caught Leslie and I, Curtis and Denise, they caught us. But the reason I say that those people caught us is because I know that I have faith that God brought them into our lives and the divine circumstances. I have a message about how our lives are like this tapestry. We went to Rome and we saw the tapestries, and you could look out and see this picture. But if you focused in and walked really close to it, you saw the threads. And so I live by that. I live by this idea that there are so many threads that God is weaving in our lives, and many of the threads are people. And when you take the time to discern, to walk, and to listen, and to receive, and to learn, and to even take talk for that matter. I think the biggest thing too is I would tell myself to talk to someone, not someone else, to get counseling. I think I'm much more healthier now because I've talked things out as opposed to continually packing it in. I would also tell myself the gap between expectation and reality is always disappointment. And I had extreme expectations, and there was a lot of reality facing and a lot of disappointment. In ministry, just that goes with the territory. You listening, anyone that's worked as a volunteer or a pastor knows that there's a lot of disappointment. And perhaps it's because our expectations are one thing and the reality is another. I think that's one of the wisdoms that I've gotten. And now it's not that I don't expect anything, but I told you this morning, Les. I think I used to live in such a way that I pursued and I ran after things and I was always running and time was always ahead of me. Whereas there's an analogy that I'm working on and trying to understand even more is that if we're present, then time passes through you and you're actually alive. I don't think I was fully alive. I don't even know what fully alive Brett looks like yet. Because I know I'm healed. I know I'm healing. And I know I'm coming alive every day and every year. But I think this podcast is going to be another way that I come more alive. Because I think that has to do, and this is such an anchoring word. I think I've been afraid to be who I really am. And I've been afraid, not afraid, but I haven't even attempted to experience what a fully alive Brett is. And that's what I'm going to do. And then the most exciting thing as we wrap, as I thought about this podcast more, and one of the reasons I'm going to do it is because I love people. And now I get to invite really fascinating people to this podcast to talk to them and have conversations. And there'll be times where it'll be one-on-one. There'll be times where I may have 6 or 7 people on the screen and we'll see where it goes. And it might get rowdy, but it'll be people and it'll be courage, wisdom, and identity as the topics. And from that, I think we're going to do this. What brave wisdom is where courage fuels radical focus and wisdom cuts through the lies. I'd like to thank my guest, who is also the person I love more than anyone in this world, my wife, Leslee.
I love you. I'm so proud of you. If this is any indication how the rest of the season is going to go, then get ready to experience just not only impact in your life, but for people's lives to finally feel like they've been seen and heard and understood. So I'm so proud of you and I love you.